Well, during the last presidential election, many Americans wanted a change, of course, in Washington's political scene. But it seems that some folks may now have voters' remorse. So they say that there is hope, but no change. Well, joining us now from New York to talk about President Obama's report card and, of course, the 2011 budget plans, former editor of Air America, Megan Carpenter. Megan, first of all, I want to talk to you about the 9/11 trial, all this sort of back and forth with that. First, they say it's happening in New York City. Now it looks like they might be reconsidering this. And, you know, it's really not the first time that we're seeing this sort of back and forth. Now you recently wrote an interesting piece entitled Obama Hope, but No Change. And you say that Americans sort of, you know, they rushed to the polls in 2008. And just a year later, quote, in 2009, American voters realized they had elected a centrist Clinton acolyte. And they've been steamed ever since. You know, what is really getting Americans so angry? Could it have to do with this, all this back and forth in the Obama administration?
I think the thing that voters are most angry at with the Obama administration is they were promised change. And as Obama said in the State of the Union, change doesn't happen quickly, which is a completely legitimate, rational thing to say. The problem is that for a lot of Americans, change has come really quickly. They have, as I did recently, lost their jobs when their companies have closed or downsized. They've lost their houses. They've, you know, lost a lot of the hope that they had going into the election. A lot of people have lost their health care coverage. And all of these changes that were promised have materialized in a direction that people aren't necessarily very happy with. So I think there is a lot of back and forth, but when it comes to something like the 9/11 trial, I don't think that enters a lot of people's minds when they're worried about where their next paycheck is coming from.
And speaking of paychecks, I want to talk to you about the 2011 budget that Obama is sending to Congress today. $3.8 trillion, though he does want to freeze a lot of domestic spending programs for the rest of his term. But I want you to break it down for us. Who are the winners here and who are the losers? Which institutions are going to sort of see increases and which are not?
Well, the State Department and the Department of Education are two of the agencies that are going to be seeing increases in the budget if the president's budget passed as promised. Those are two of the big winners. A lot of the other agencies are seeing their budgets significantly slashed in order to pay for that. And the other problem, of course, is that the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security are seeing absolutely no cuts, that they're not part of Obama's spending freeze. And so they're asking for more money and not even including in today's budget proposals the cost of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So they're actually, financially speaking, the biggest winners. One of the things that they're not asking for and that Defense Secretary Gates is saying he doesn't want is a specific series of airplanes that Congress keeps trying to put in the defense budget, and the Defense Department says that it doesn't want for the kind of wars that we're fighting today. So those will probably get added back in at some point, and then it'll be a back and forth between Congress and the administration about whether that money stays in the budget and whether it gets spent the way Congress wants to see it spent.
You know, you touched on this briefly, but I mean, how does he make that decision? I mean, what is it really based on? Because obviously, if we follow the money trail, we see where the priorities are, right?
Well, I think he makes a lot of these decisions partly based on priorities and partly based on the fact that he's trying to keep deficits as low as possible, although he said that he inherited a deficit and so he doesn't feel like in this particular budget he's able to or inclined to reduce the deficit. I think when it comes to things like which airplanes, a lot of that comes down to, as everything else does, jobs. I think President Clinton actually once said it's the economy, stupid. Congress people want to keep jobs in their districts. Building defense equipment, particularly airplanes, are really high-end jobs that pay people a lot of money. They import a lot of supplies. They're great for districts. The military is saying they don't need the planes, and Congress is saying, well, our constituents need the jobs. And so it just depends, you know, what your priorities are, supplying the military with the equipment they say they want, or keeping people that are back home employed the way they've been employed historically.
You know, Megan, still, you know, when I'm on the Hill, it seems like he's not winning on either side of the aisle, because you got many liberals saying you can't cut spending when the economy is this bad, when it still needs hundreds of billions more stimulus money, and then you have the Republicans saying he's not saving enough. So where does he sort of find that balance, do you think?
Well, I think he's trying to split that difference, and now, in fact, you have some liberals saying that not subjecting Defense Department and Homeland Security funding to the spending freeze is problematic, in addition to not increasing any stimulus funds, and Republicans saying, yeah, maybe the Defense Department should be subject to spending freezes, which is the first time in 9 years anybody on the Republican side of the aisle said that. I think that people are upset, and what they want to see is they want to see jobs and they want to see economic improvement, and they don't necessarily see where increasing money for State Department operations abroad necessarily brings the kind of economic stimulus that Americans are really demanding. I think, you know, when times are good and Americans have jobs and they're not looking at 10% unemployment and they're not wondering where their next paycheck is coming from, State Department spending versus Defense Department spending versus, you know, all of these things aren't as important. And now
and Megan,
the Defense Department is getting all this money, and yet people still aren't having jobs. I think that's going to continue to be problematic from both sides of the aisle. And
right, Megan. When we're going to have to see
what in the budget is.
We're going to also have to see how that affects his poll numbers as well. Megan Carpenter, former editor of Air America, thank you for your analysis.